You know, at Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI garbage. And what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it that way. I'm Daniel Pierce, and I'm going to be your narrator. Now, let's get into today's story. Query is a sorry engineer, a fate you will eventually suffer as they volunteer information with the smug self-assurance of a deity explaining thermodynamics to a toddler. And they will insist the cosmos awaits balancing like a great equation. They view the galaxy as a spreadsheet of predictable variables, x equals y, provided you maintain correct spinal alignment. Ask Cadet John Reese while he kicks a jam conveyor belt back to life with a boot that has seen more abuse than a rental shuttle. And he calls that philosophy fertilizer. Gravity, electromagnetism, and strong nuclear interactions fail to hold the universe together. Those serve as polite suggestions from a reality that fundamentally favors chaos. Torque, friction, luck, and the pig-headed refusal of broken things to stay broken bind the universe. Currently, the universe resembled a strip bolt, and he possessed the quadrant's only pair of vice grips. The salvage bay of the Tri-Spiral Naval Academy mocked the concept of breakage. It resembled a temple dedicated to the acute angle. The air smelled of singed copper, lemon-scented industrial polish, and the sour reek of academic failure. The bay stood as a cathedral to the Cesari aesthetic, high-vaulted ceilings of seamless white composite, perfectly symmetrical support struts resembling modern art rather than load-bearing architecture, and lighting strips that cast no shadows. Shadows implied uncertainty. The designers built it to simulate the harsh reality of deep space wreckage, but in the Cesari way, clean, organized, and theoretically perfect. Even the debris scattered for training purposes appeared arranged by a decorator suffering from severe compulsions. Dust remained absent, rust remained a myth, only geometry existed here. Disaster, however, unfolded in humiliating slow motion.
Cadet Cash, adjust your vector. You drift. The load oscillates. Your symmetry breaks. I detect a 3mm variance in your left elbow, Cadet. Correct it immediately.
Rel Cash, a Cesari cadet with a spine rigid as a titanium rod and a future dependent on secure grip strength, gritted his teeth until they squeaked. He and 3 other cadets stood locked in an arrangement known as the Tetralift. They surrounded a massive, deactivated bulkhead door, the slab. The slab slipped its magnetic moorings during the simulation setup. It pinned a sensor drone, a delicate, terrifyingly expensive piece of hardware worth more than the GDP of Jonah's hometown, underneath its crushing bulk. The slab weighed 400 kilograms. In the Academy's standard gravity, it lay there as a dead, hateful weight that seemingly resented movement. Initiate synchronized extension. Rel gasped, sweat slicking his palms inside his friction gloves. On my mark. 3, 2, 1, lift. The 4 Cesari moved as one. The motion possessed a sterile, heartbreaking beauty. They squatted in unison, spines perpendicular to the floor, chins up, eyes forward, arms extended as identical 45-degree angles. They engaged their quadriceps simultaneously. The geometry held flaws at bay. A snapshot would belong in a textbook under ideal force application, the theory. Physics, however, behaved rudely. A micro-fracture from a previous exercise involving a dropped engine block marred the floor, a detail the cleaning bots polished over but failed to repair, and the slab rested on an uneven lip of metal. The load distributed unevenly. The universe ignored their symmetry. When they pulled, the slab twisted instead of rising. The dead weight shifted violently to the left. The cadet on the port side, a slight Cesari named Mox, buckled. His boot slipped on the lemon-scented polish. The symmetry disintegrated. Clang! The slab slammed back down. The deafening noise told for their careers. It missed the crushed sensor drone by a millimeter, sending a spark of protesting metal into the air and shaving a layer of paint off the drone's casing.
Halt!
Vest shouted, slapping the rail. The sound echoed through the cavernous bay, bouncing off the pristine white walls.
You fight the mass! You treat the weight as an adversary! Flow with the equation! Reset positions! Layout 4! Again!
Jonah Reese leaned against a tool rack in the back of the bay, chewing on a synthetic toothpick. He adjusted the heavy rigger's belt hanging low on his hips, gear the Sasari considered archaic, ugly, and emblematic of humanity's unfinished nature. Jonah watched the teal-skinned cadets reset. Terror radiated from them. They shook, they trembled, burdened by the task of applying perfect math to an imperfect object. They brought calculus to a mud fight, and the mud won. "They'll blow a disc," Jonah muttered, his voice a low gravel rumble. "Lift with a straight back on a slick floor, pop goes the vertebrae. Then comes a medical discharge and a lifetime of anti-grav braces."
Cadet Reese!
Vess's voice snapped across the bay. She possessed the hearing of a bat and the temperament of a starved shark.
Do you offer a contribution? Or do you prefer acting as a biological ballast for this station, consuming oxygen productive members of the fleet require?
Jonah sighed, the sound heavy with resignation. He took the toothpick out of his mouth and tucked it into his waist pocket of his fatigues. He pushed off the rack, his boots making a heavy, dull thud against the pristine deck. He moved with a rolling, uneven gait, the walk of someone who spent years balancing on floating pontoons in the Pacific Northwest orbital yards, where the floor moves and the sea tries to kill you. He stomped rather than glided. He occupied space. "Just saying, ma'am. The floor warps. Layout 4 assumes a flat plane. That plate pitches 3 degrees off center. Light refracts off the polish differently right there." He pointed a calloused finger at a smudge of light on the deck. "A localized depression sits there, probably from the reactor casing drop last semester."
The floor remains within tolerance.
Vess snapped, dismissing him with a sharp wave.
Cadet, discipline calls this failure. Step forward, Reese. Since you possess such keen optical senses and an abundance of opinions, perhaps you can demonstrate the correct way.
He recognized the snare. The other cadets knew it too. Vess wanted him to fall in line, try to outmuscle the Sasari with his brutish human strength, and fail. She wanted to prove human grit matched Sasari geometry poorly. She intended to show the class that roughneck physics belonged in the trash compactor. Jonah walked to the slab. The Sasari cadets stepped back, nursing their wrist and rubbing their lower backs. Raoul looked at him, eyes wide, broadcasting a mix of pity and morbid curiosity. "Don't do it, Jonah," Raoul whispered, barely moving his lips. "It weighs too much. The vector defies us. You will rupture a tendon." Jonah ignored the stance. He ignored squaring his shoulders. He ignored visualizing the math. He paced a slow, lazy circle around the slab. He kicked the edge of it with his steel-toed boot. Thunk. It sounded solid, dense, dead weight. He looked at the floor. There, just under the lip of the bulkhead, a gap appeared. Maybe 2 centimeters of clearance where the metal warped. Ugly and small, but sufficient. He looked at the sensor drone trapped underneath, its optical lens blinking sadly, begging for release. Then he looked at the magnetic lock system on the wall, a heavy industrial cleat bolted to the frame. It secured cargo nets rather than lifted loads, but bolts anchored it into the station's frame. It held firm.
Cadet,
Vess said, her voice dripping with icy patience.
we await your posture. Align your spine. Tuck your pelvis.
Posture suits statues, ma'am. Jonah grunted. I move cargo. He unclipped his rigger's belt. The brass buckle, worn smooth on one side from a million leans against steel bulkheads, shone dully. The polymer strap served as a roadmap of past disasters, a dark stain from a busted hydraulic line on Ganymede, a faint scorch mark from a plasma cutter incident, and the salty, permanent ghost of a decade's worth of sweat. It appeared ugly and brutal compared to the sleek magnetic belts of the Sasari. He threaded the heavy buckle in through the gap under the slab. He looped the other end around the floor cleat, a tie-down point the Sasari ignored because the lifting procedure excluded it. He cinched the belt tight, creating a taut line between the floor and the bottom edge of the slab. He checked the nut. The ugly, gnarling friction hitch would hold it well. Then Jonah turned his back to the weight. A collective gasp rippled through the Sasari cadets. Turning your back on a load constituted structural heresy. It blinded you to the variables. It insulted the equation. It told the math to go to hell. Jonah ignored them. He stepped 1 foot back, jamming his heel against the floor cleat. He grabbed the strap of his belt with his right hand, wrapping it once around his palm, the rough polymer biting into his skin. He let his left hand hang loose at his side, wiggling his fingers to keep them relaxed. He bent his knees, not in a squat, but in a lunge, ugly, asymmetrical, and jagged. He leaned back. He refused to pull with his arm. He refused to curl the weight. He refused to grunt or strain his bicep. He simply allowed gravity to take his body weight backward. He transformed himself into a counterweight. The belt snapped taut like a steel bar. The forecleat acted as a fulcrum. The geometry shifted instantly from a lifting problem to a leverage problem. The slab groaned. The distinct sound marked metal realizing it lacked choices. The Cesari watched as the massive bulkhead lifted. It peeled off the floor, rising steadily, smoothly. Jonah relaxed his face. He looked like a man leaning against a wall awaiting a bus. He just hung there, letting the laws of physics perform the heavy lifting. His body served as the anchor. Gravity served as the engine. With the slab raised 6 inches, Jonah used his free left foot to casually kick the sensor drone. It skittered across the floor, spinning safely away from the crush zone, its lights blinking a grateful green. Jonah stood up, stepping forward to release the tension. The slab slammed back down with a thud that vibrated in everyone's teeth, a punctuation mark on the lesson. He reclipped his belt, the buckle clicking loudly in the quiet room. He wiped his hand on his pads, leaving a faint streak of oil. Quiet filled the salvage bay. The heavy, confused quiet of people who just witnessed a magic trick performed with a sledgehammer dominated the room. Rael Cash stared at Jonah's arm. It looked soft, unremarkable. How did he do that? Jonah looked up at the gantry. Vess froze, her mouth a thin, straight line. She processed the data, and the data made no sense to her worldview. She searched for the trick, the hidden hydraulic, the exoskeleton. Leverage, ma'am, Jonah said, his voice echoing in the quiet. Work with gravity? Make it work for you. Gravity offers free labor, if you ask. The briefing room shone aggressively white. The hue made eyes ache, designed to eliminate distraction and promote pure, distilled thought. Jonah sat at the single metal table in the center of the room, feeling like a smudge of dirt on a wedding dress. Lieutenant Vess stood at the front, a holographic display hovering behind her. It looped a video of Jonah's lift over and over again. The image played. Jonah leaning back, the belt pulling taut, the slab rising. Anatomical disaster, Vess said, pointing a laser indicator at Jonah's spine on the screen. Observe this curvature. Observe the unequal load on the hip joints. By all simulation data, you dislocated your shoulder. Your rotator cuff shredded, your lumbar disc pulverized. They remain intact, Jonah said, keeping his voice level. I feel fine. A statistical anomaly, an error in the data, Vess countered, turning to face him. Her eyes burned a piercing amber, intelligent but rigid. The Tri-Spiral Academy stands on the principles of order, symmetry, and predictability. We shun tricks, Cadet Reese. We rely on repeatable, standardized force application. A Cesari cadet attempting that would shatter their pelvis. Cesari fall poorly, Jonah said. You stand so straight that when gravity pushes back, you break. Humans, we squish. We bend. We possess cartilage where you possess bone fusion. Standard regulation, Vess interrupted, tapping the screen where a red warning light flashed over Jonah's posture. Saves lives. It ensures that if a cadet exerts X force, they achieve Y result. Standard regulation assumes a flat floor, Jonah said, leaning forward, resting his elbows on the pristine table. It assumes stable gravity. It assumes the cargo possesses handles and the universe desires to help you. Out there, in that wreck, the universe wants you dead, Lieutenant. The floor always warps, the handle always breaks, and gravity usually drinks on the job. Vess slammed her hand on the table, a calculated display of anger, perfectly controlled, but her eyes flashed.
When you teach my cadets to ignore the manual, you teach them to gamble. You risk spinal compression. You risk equipment. You introduced unauthorized variables. You used a belt, a clothing item, as industrial rigging.
I saved the drone, Jonah pointed out, and my spine holds. I've lifted crates since age 12. My back knows more about physics than that computer. My back knows when a load plays dead and when it plays live. The computer just sees numbers. Vess narrowed her eyes. She walked around the table, looming over him. You are soft. The Federation assesses your species as such. You lack the skeletal rigidity for high G impacts. You lack the natural insulation for thermal variance. You function as a temporary adhesive, sticky, cheap, and disposable. You remain here because of a diversity quota, Reese. Mistake not your presence for competence. She tapped her datapad. I mark you down for insubordination and reckless endangerment. You will attend remedial kinetics classes. If you deviate from the standard manual one more time, if you perform one more act of cowboy engineering, I will expel you. You will scrape barnacles on the docks before the rotation ends. Do you understand? Jonah held her gaze. He yearned to argue. He yearned to explain torque curves, friction coefficients, and the feel of metal before it gives. But he faced a wall of dogma. And his family back in the Pacific Northwest orbital slums needed the credits this commission brought. His sister needed optic surgery. His mom worked double shifts at the cannery. Understood, ma'am, Jonah said, keeping his face blank. Dismissed. The locker room smelled of analgesic balm, a sharp, minty scent that watered the eyes and stuck to the back of the throat. The smell of Zasari pain. The cadets huddled on the long, floating benches, applying heat patches to their lower backs. Their rigid fused spines gave them incredible stability for upright loads, but they handled torsion poorly. The failed lift tweaked them all. Jonah sat on his bench, happily oiling his boots with a rag. He hummed a tune that sounded suspiciously like a grinding conveyor belt. He alone refrained from groaning. Rel Cash walked over, moving stiffly like a robot with a rusted servo. He stood over Jonah, casting a long shadow. The Zasari stood tall, nearly 7 feet, with broad shoulders and limbs that tapered elegantly. His teal skin flushed darker around the neck, a sign of bruising. Cadet Reese, Rel said. Jonah looked up, pausing his polishing. Rel, how's the back? You guys look like you tried to pass a kidney stone out there. Optimal function stands compromised, Rel admitted stiffly. He hesitated, looking around to ensure Vess remained absent from the vents, then sat down on the bench opposite Jonah. He stared at Jonah's arms. May I? Jonah shrugged. Sure, whatever floats your boat. Rel reached out and poked Jonah's bicep. His long teal fingers sank into the muscle. He looked horrified. It feels doughy. Hey, watch it, Jonah laughed, pulling his arm back. That's prime organic suspension, shock absorption. I fail to understand, Rel said, withdrawing his hand and looking at his own fingertip as if contaminated. You lack all strength. Your muscle density measures lower. Your bone structure remains porous. By all metrics, the slab should have crushed you. Yet you moved it with one hand. I ran the calculation 3 times in my head. The force required exceeds your output. Jonah stopped oiling his boot. He put the rag down. He looked at the Zasari, seeing the genuine confusion in the alien's eyes. Rel lacked stupidity. He suffered from education beyond his intelligence. He learned that the map equaled the territory. Rel, let me ask you something. To open a stuck jar, do you squeeze it harder? Maximum grip pressure offers the logical solution to increase friction, Rel said immediately. Wrong. You tap the lid on the counter to break the vacuum seal. Then you twist. Jonah tapped his own temple. My muscles ignored the door. My brain lifted it. You guys try to outmuscle physics. You treat gravity like an enemy you must beat into submission. I just ask it politely to move. Ralph frowned, processing this. You anthropomorphize the fundamental forces. I treat them like co-workers, Jonah corrected. Sometimes they act lazy, sometimes they act mean. but talk to them right, and they do the job for you. Mechanical advantage. Work smart, not hard. Raoul looked at his own hands, long, elegant, capable of delicate calculations, and currently trembling with strain. Work smart, he whispered. The manual lacks a chapter on that. My entire education fails to explain a stuck jaw lid. Yeah, Jonah grinned, lacing up his boot with a quick, deft yank. That's why I write the footnotes. Stick with me, kid. I'll teach you how to cheat. The theory lecture hall sat as a bubble of darkness illuminated by a massive rotating hologram of a starship hull strut. The instructor, a Sasari with a voice like a droning turbine and a personality to match, explained the load limits of trititanium alloys. Calculate the shear point of strut alpha under 4,000 kilonewtons of torque, the instructor commanded. You have 5 minutes. Show your proofs. The air filled with the tapping of datapads. The Sasari students input complex calculations factoring in alloy density, ambient temperature, resonant frequencies, and molecular bonding strength. They built a mathematical model of the universe inside their heads. Jonas stared at the hologram. He ignored his pad. He squinted. He tilted his head to the side, then the other side. He chewed his cheek. He raised his hand. The instructor paused mid-drone. Cadet Reese, you completed the equation in 30 seconds. A record. No, sir. I skipped the math, but I can tell you where it breaks. The instructor blinked, his nictitating membranes flashing. Without math. Absurd. Jonas stood up and walked to the massive hologram. He pointed to a section of the strut that looked perfectly fine to the untrained eye, but to Jonah, the light looked wrong. It failed to reflect smoothly. It warped, stretching across a nearly invisible bend in the alloy, like skin pulled too tight over a bone about to break. It matched the look the portside crane on the ancient hauler back home bore right before it dropped 3 tons of iron ore into the bay. He could almost hear the shriek of the metal in his head, a phantom sound from his childhood. Right there, Jonas said, poking his finger into the light, just above the flange. It shears at about 40% load. Preposterous, the instructor scoffed. The cross-section there measures thickest. The math dictates failure at the joint, not the flange. You guess. The math assumes happy metal, Jonah said, tapping the glowing light. That curve? A stress riser. The grain structure pinched. I've seen that shadow 100 times on the docks. It screams. Can't you hear it? The class snickered. The metal screams, the cadet whispered mockingly. Perhaps we should offer it a tissue. Run the sim, Jonah said, crossing his arms. Prove me wrong, the instructor sneered. Very well. Let us demonstrate the fallacy of human intuition. He keyed the command. The simulation applied torque. The load counter climbed. 10%, 20%, 30%. The class watched the joint, expecting failure. The math named the joint the weak point. At 38%, a hairline fracture appeared exactly where Jonah pointed. It spiderwebbed instantly. At 41%, the strut snapped violently, sending virtual debris flying through the lecture hall. Quiet pressed down on the room. The snickering died. The cadets stared at the shattered hologram, then at Jonah, then at their datapads, trying to find the error in their perfect world. Statistical anomaly, the instructor muttered, clearing the screen with a frantic wave. The simulation parameters must contain a glitch. Sit down, Reese, and show your work next time. Jonas sat. He kept a straight face. Being right mattered little if nobody believed you. It just made you lonely. The chronometer read 0200 hours. The academy gym sat dark, save the running lights on the equipment and the blue glow of the recycling scrubbers. The air recycler hummed in the background, a rhythmic thrum that usually put Jonah to sleep. Tonight, thirst kept him awake. He walked in and stopped. Raoul Cash stood alone. He faced a heavy weight sled, a metal box filled with lead plates. He stood in a perfect stance. His spine remained straight. His grip remained symmetrical. He pulled. The sled stayed put. He grunted, straining, his teal face darkening to a deep purple. He adjusted his stance by a millimeter, seeking the perfect angle. He pulled again. Nothing. You resemble a constipated flamingo. Jonah's voice cut through the dark. Raoul jumped, spinning around. Jonah stood in the doorway, holding the hydration pack. He wore a stained tank top that revealed the jagged scars on his shoulders, 7 years from a life of labor, marks where cables snapped and metal bit. "I attempt to replicate your leverage technique," Rao said defensively, trying to regain composure. "But the geometry defies compliance. I failed to generate the requisite force vector." Jonah walked over, the hydration pack swinging from his hand. He circled Rao. "The geometry works fine. The vector works fine. You pose the problem. You try to look good." "Form equals function," Rao recited automatically. "Form equals vanity," Jonah corrected. "You stand stiff. You try to isolate the muscle groups. Works for bodybuilding, sucks for moving furniture." He kicked Rao's feet apart, wider. Rao stumbled. "That lies outside the optimal stability zone. If I slip—" "Wider," Jonah ordered. "Get ugly, Rao. Drop your butt. Get low. Crouch like you hide, like an animal." Rao lowered himself. He felt ridiculous. His knees splayed, his spine bent forward. His center of gravity felt messy. He felt raw. "I feel uncivilized." "Good," Jonah said, stepping closer. He put a hand on Rao's back and pushed him down further. "Now ignore your arms. Your arms serve as hooks. They connect the engine to the load. Your legs serve as the engine. Drive with your hips. Push the floor away from you. Explode." Rao looked at the sled. He grabbed the handles. He felt off balance, ungraceful. He took a breath. "Ugly," Rao whispered to himself. He drove his hips forward. He grunted, a guttural, harsh sound absent from the Zazari lexicon. The sled flew. It shot across the floor rails, slamming into the stops with a satisfying crash that echoed through the gym. Rao stared at his hands. He looked at the sled. He looked at Jonah, eyes wide with shock. "The vector," Rao stammered. "The output proved exponential. I felt no strain in my dorsal stabilizers." Jonah took a sip of his water, watching realization dawn on the alien. "Pretty gets you killed, Rao. Ugly gets you home. Remember that." The mess hall erupted in a cacophony of clicking jaws, synthesized speech, and clattering trays. The air smelled of 500 different species comfort foods combining into a scent resembling wet socks and curry. Jonah sat with Rao, eating a bowl of beige algae mash that tasted like wet cardboard but possessed the nutritional density of a steak. A shadow fell over their table, a large, wide shadow. 3 cadets from the Bronter sector loomed over them. Bronters were heavy worlders, short, wide, and dense as dwarf stars. Their arms measured thicker than Jonah's waist, and their skin looked like pebbled leather. They ranked as the strongest species in the academy, and they knew it. "We hear stories," the lead Bronter grunted. His voice sounded like gravel in a blender. "The one-handed human." Jonah continued eating his mash. "Just a nickname. Don't get excited. No superhero name here." "We think it a lie," the Bronter said. He slammed a fist onto the table. The trays rattled. "Humans are soft, weak bones. We challenge. Arm wrestle. Now." Pass," Jonah said. "Waste of calories, and I require this arm for reports." The cafeteria quieted it. Refusing a challenge signaled weakness. Eyes turned toward them. "Coward," the Bronter sneered, leaning in. "Soft human. Go back to your mud bowl." Jonah sighed. He put down his spoon. He looked at the table. It was a heavy, magnetically anchored dining unit with a central pedestal. Bolts secured it to the floor, but the magnetic seals allowed movement for cleaning. "Tell you what," Jonah said, wiping his mouth. "I refuse to arm wrestle, but I bet my dessert rations for a month that I can hold this table down while the 3 of you try to lift it." The Bronters laughed, a harsh, barking sound. 3 of us against you. You are tiny. "Is that a yes?" "Yes. We will take your rations and your dignity." The 3 Bronters positioned themselves around the table. They grabbed the edges, their muscles bunched, looking like boulders under the skin. They prepared to rip the table off the floor. Jonah stood up slowly. He walked to the head of the table. He ignored the edge. Instead, he hooked the toe of his heavy work boot under the lip of the central pedestal base. Then, He placed his hands on the far edge of the table, opposite the Bronters. "Go," Jonah said. The Bronters roared and lifted. Jonah simply leaned forward. He pressed down on the far edge while pulling up with his toe. He turned the table into a Class 1 lever. The Bronters applied force to the load arm. The central pedestal served as the fulcrum, but because Jonah applied force at the extreme edge of the lever arm and anchored the fulcrum with his foot, his force multiplied by a factor of 10. The Bronters strained, their faces turned a dangerous shade of crimson. Veins popped in their necks, the table groaned, the metal complaining, but it stayed put. It barely vibrated. Jonah stood there, one leg hooked, leaning casually on his hands. He picked up an apple with one hand and took a bite. Crunch. "You guys okay?" Jonah asked, mouth full. "You look flushed. Remember to breathe." The lead Bronter let go, gasping for air. The other two collapsed, their arms shaking. They stared at Jonah as if he were a deity of gravity. "Human density," one whispered, terrified. "Unbelievable. He weighs tons." Jonah released his hook. "Physics," he said, tossing the apple core onto his tray. "Thanks for the dessert. I enjoyed the chocolate pudding."
You resembled debris,
Vess said. They sat in the debriefing room after the zero-G simulation. Jonah felt dizzy. The simulation required them to retrieve a drifting crate in a chaotic zero-G field. The Cesari used microthrusters to glide elegantly, correcting their vectors with mathematical exactitude. Jonah ignored the thrusters. He fired a magnetic grapple hook at the far wall, swung himself like a pendulum, and snagged the crate with his legs. He crashed into the recovery bay wall hard enough to bruise his ribs, but he arrived 30 seconds faster than the fastest Cesari. "I secured the crate, ma'am," Jonah wheezed, holding his side. "Mission accomplished." "You ignored the thrusters," Vess countered, pacing the room. "You turned yourself into a kinetic missile. You lacked control. If that wall were fragile, you breached the hull." "I utilized momentum," Jonah argued. "Speed equals security in a salvage job."
Momentum is not controlled,
Vess shouted, the first time she raised her voice in a debrief.
This stands as your final warning, Reese. You act as a chaotic element. One more deviation, one more instance where you choose your ugly methods over the standard manual, and you leave. I will not have you jeopardize the safety of this flight. Do you understand? I will sign your discharge papers myself.
The room fell silent. Raoul looked at his feet. The other cadets held their breath. "Yes, ma'am," Jonah said quietly. He meant it. He needed this commission. His sister needed surgery back home. His mom worked double shifts. If he must dance like a Cesari to graduate, he would dance. He would become the prettiest, most useless cadet in the fleet if required. The universe, possessing a cruel sense of humor and a deep hatred for plans, tested that resolve immediately. The incident began on the Academy's orbital ring, the automated superhauler. The arithmetical truth, a masterpiece of Cesari engineering, flew fully automated, guided by the sector's most advanced navigation AI. It approached the Academy's docking ring with thousands of tons of supplies, fuel, food, spare parts. But the AI suffered a glitch, a minor sensor error. It miscalculated the closing velocity by 0.04%. A human pilot would have eyeballed it, felt the speed was off, and fired the retro rockets. A human pilot would have said, that looks too fast. The AI, trusting its perfect math, did nothing. It assumed the universe would conform to its calculation. The universe refused. The impact felt like the end of the world. The arithmetical truth slammed into the Academy's orbital ring. The sound surpassed a crash. It became a scream. The shriek of tortured metal vibrated through the bones of every cadet on the station. The docking ring buckled. The station's gyroscope screamed in protest. Gravity flickered. 1 second it sat at 1G, then at 0.2G, then 1.5G. People hit walls, then floated and slammed down again. In the salvage bay, the lights died instantly, replaced by the strobing, nauseating crimson of emergency klaxons. "Hull breach in Sector 4. The automated voice shrieked, devoid of panic but full of terrifying finality. "Atmospheric integrity failing. Seal initiated." Blast doors slammed shut, sealing Vess's squad inside the wrecked salvage bay, but the impact twisted the frame. The bay failed to seal tight. Air leaked. The whistle, the thin, high-pitched sound of approaching death filled the space. Worse, the ceiling collapsed.
"Sound off!"
Vess yelled. Her voice sounded strained, breathless.
"Report!"
"Kishti here," Ral shouted from the darkness. Cadets Mux and V are conscious. Minor injuries.
Report status!
Lieutenant. Ral's voice wavered, cracking with fear. The lieutenant is pinned. Jonah scrambled over a pile of twisted conduit, coughing in the rising dust. The air grew thin, filled with smoke and the acrid taste of electrical fire. He found Vess near the center of the room. A massive structural I-beam fell from the ceiling. It lay across Vess's legs, pinning her to the deck. She remained conscious, but her face turned gray, her eyes wide with shock. The beam was immense, easily 2 tons of composite alloy. Move me not, Vess grasped, clutching her chest. Crush syndrome. If you lift, toxins release. Systemic shock. If we leave it, you die, Jonah said, dropping to his knees beside her. Oxygen vents. We have maybe 10 minutes of air before we suffocate. We must move. Procedure 7, Vess whispered, clinging to her training even as she bled. Organized debris removal. Ral and the other cadets rushed over. They looked at the beam. They looked at each other. They instinctively fell into layout 4 despite the chaos. Ready to live, Ral shouted. On my mark.
Stop!
Jonah barked. They froze.
Look at the floor!
Jonah yelled, shining his emergency light.
Hydraulic fluid slicks the surface. A line burst. Try to lift with layout 4 and you slip. You drop it on her, you kill her.
The manual dictates. Ral started, panic driving him to remote memorization.
Screw the manual!
Jonah roared. The sudden anger stunned them.
Look at the mess! Symmetry fails here! The universe broke! The manual fails here!
Ral looked at his wrist comp. It showed the standard regulation, a clean diagram of lifting. He looked at the jagged, oily reality of the wreckage. He looked at Vess's pain-filled eyes. He looked at the leaking air. Ral ripped the wrist comp off his arm and smashed it against the wall. Shattered glass rained down. Turned to Jonah, his eyes fierce. Cadet Reese, direct us. Jonah acted. He shed the cadet persona. He shed the soft human label. He became the foreman of Orbital Dock 4, and his crew faced trouble.
Ral, get that pipe. The long one sticking out the wall. Use it as a breaker bar. Mox, V, grab the debris, the wedges. Jam them under the beam as we lift. We are moving mass, not lifting weight. Don't fight it. Slide it.
The cadets scrambled. They abandoned unison. They moved with frantic, ugly purpose. Jonah looked at the beam. Too heavy to lift straight up. Even with levers, the angle proved bad. He looked at the 4-plate Vess lay on. Compromised, the rivets popped by the crash. We can't lift the beam. Jonah realized, his mind racing. So we dropped the floor. Explain, Ral shouted, returning with a 3-meter steel pipe. The 4-plate sits loose, Jonah said, pointing to the seam. If we pry the other side of the plate, this side tilts down. The beam slides off. Gravity does the work. That requires a fulcrum, Ral yelled. There is no mount.
I am the fulcrum,
Jonah shouted. He grabbed a thick slab of foam insulation from the wreckage and jammed it against his shoulder. He wedged his body into a crevice under the far side of the floor plate. He curled into a ball, bracing his back against the plate and his feet against the solid deck below. He locked his elbows. He locked his knees. He became a living chalk block. He became the stone.
Ral, jam the pipe under the plate. Use my shoulder as the pivot. Jump on the other end, now!
Ral jammed the pipe. The metal pressed into the foam, but the pressure transmitted straight to Jonah's bones.
Jump!
Jonah screamed. Ral and the other 2 cadets leaped onto the end of the pipe. Jonah screamed as the weight multiplied across his body. His bones creaked. He felt the capillaries burst in his shoulder. The pain burned white-hot, blinding, absurd. His clavicle should snap. His ribs should implode. But he locked his skeleton. He ignored muscle. He used bone compression. He became the rock. He became the soft human who refused to break. The floor plate tilted. The angle changed. The massive I-beam, no longer on a flat surface, obeyed the new vector. It slid. It slid 3 feet to the side, clearing Vess's legs with a terrible grinding sound. Clear, Ral shouted. She is clear. Jonah collapsed, the pipe clattering away. He lay there for a second, gasping, his vision swimming with black dots. His shoulder throbbed, probably fractured. But his arm worked. I'm good. Next problem. They dragged Vess free. Her legs were mangled, looking like crushed fruit, but she lived.
The exit!
Jonah pointed.
The blast door!
They carried Vess to the blast door. The electronic control panel sparked out, dead. Smoke curled from the keypad.
Manual override!
Jonah ordered. The manual override wheel waited there, a red iron wheel set into the wall.
Open it!
Cadet V, the burly Zasari, grabbed the wheel. He twisted with perfect form. He applied maximum torque. Snap. The wheel sheared off, the metal fatigued from the crash impact. It broke clean off in V's hands, leaving nothing but a smooth, round nub of a shaft protruding from the door. V stared at his hands, then at the useless wheel. It broke. We could not grip the shaft. It is smooth. Purchase is unthinkable. Oxygen critical, the AI warned. 2 minutes remaining. We die, V whispered, backing away. We can't turn a smooth shaft. Physics forbids it. Jonah shoved him aside. He dropped to one knee. He pulled the laces from his heavy work boots with frantic speed. Long, reinforced Kevlar laces. He pulled the wrench from his belt. He tied the laces into a loop. He wrapped the loop around the smooth nub of the shaft. He wound it tight over and over. Then he inserted the wrench handle into the loop and twisted the wrench. Spanish windlass, Jonah grunted, twisting the wrench. Oldest trick in the book. The laces tightened. As they twisted, they bit into the metal nub with crushing force. The friction measured immense. The loop constricted like a python strangling prey. Jonah grabbed the wrench and pulled. The mechanical advantage was massive. The laces held firm. They gripped the smooth metal and forced it to turn. The door gears shrieked. The blast door inched open.
Go! Go!
Jonah yelled, heaving on the wrench.
Get her out!
The cadet scrambled through the gap, dragging Vess. Jonah followed. He looked down at his unlaced boots. They flopped around, threatening to trip him. Dead weight, Jonah muttered. He kicked him off. He ran into socks, the metal grating of the floor biting into his feet, adding texture and pain to the run. He ignored the pain. He needed speed. They reached the corridor, but relief was short-lived. The air here was thin, too. The crash vented this section as well. Oxygen depleted, the AI stated flatly. Hypoxia imminent. Cadet Mox stumbled and fell. I feel sleepy, he mumbled. Hypoxia. Vess gasped, her eyes rolling back. Jonah scanned the hallway through the haze. Smoke, debris. A maintenance cart overturned near the wall. He ran to it. An industrial O2 tank for welding sat there. He dragged it over. Connect, Rel wheezed. Valves incompatible. The tank possessed a harsh industrial nozzle. The suits possessed delicate Cesare intake ports, square peg, round hole. Jonah looked at the unconscious cadet Mox. He looked at the shard of glass on the floor. Sorry, buddy, Jonah muttered. He used the glass to slash the intake hose on Mox's suit. He ripped the thermal glove of his own hand. He bit the fingertips off the glove. He shoved the cut of hose into the welding tank's nozzle. It fit loosely. Gas hissed out, wasting precious oxygen. Jonah wrapped the thermal glove around the connection. The glove, lined with a sticky, heat-reactive polymer, sealed the gap. He squeezed it tight, using his body heat to mold the sealant.
Hookah rig!
Jonah yelled.
Take a hit and pass it. Deep breaths.
He jammed the regulator open. Pure, cool oxygen flooded the hose. He shoved it into Mox's helmet hole. Mox gasped, eyes snapping open.
Next!
He passed the hose to Rao, then pressed it to Vess's face, then finally took a deep pull himself. The oxygen hit his brain like a hammer, clearing the fog and sharpening the world. The room stopped spinning. Move, Vess rasped, barely conscious. Secure zone, 2 sectors down. They moved, a ragged, ugly mess. Jonah ran in socks, sliding on soot. Rao supported Vess. Grease, blood, and soot covered them. They looked nothing like the brochures. They looked like survivors. They reached the final corridor leading to the secure zone airlock. Their hearts stopped. A massive chunk of the arithmetical truce hull punched through the station wall. A jagged slab of starship armor 10 times the size of the training slab. It completely blocked the corridor. No way around it. Behind them, the fires drew closer. The station groaned. Too heavy, Rel said, his voice hollow. Even with levers, 20 tons, we are trapped. Jonah looked at the debris. He looked at the gravity plating on the ceiling. The lights flickered wildly. Pulse, pulse. Gravity in the corridor fluctuated. The damage to the power grid caused the artificial gravity to spike and trough. Gravity's unstable, Jonas said, watching a piece of dust float then slam down. 0.5G, then 2G. So, Raoul asked, it remains too heavy, even at half gravity, 10 tons. Jonah looked at the mess of fire hoses on the wall reel. He looked at the structural pillars. We leave it on the floor, Jonas said. We just need to change its mind. He grabbed the fire hoses.
Raoul, braid these. 3 strands. We need strength. Do it now.
Raoul, understanding the urgency, began frantically braiding the heavy hoses together.
V, wrap the other end around the debris. Secure it with a friction knot.
Jonah yelled. What is the plan? Raoul shouted, tying the knot with trembling hands.
A pendulum,
Jonah yelled.
We rig a pendulum. Physics 101.
They wrapped the massive slab of debris. The braided hose went from the debris up to a high pillar and back down to the floor. Jonah avoided grabbing the hose with his hands. That would rip his arms off. He ran the hose around a secondary support pillar, a heavy, reinforced stanchion. He wrapped it 3 times.
Friction wrap,
Jonah yelled.
The pillar takes the weight. I just hold the tail.
He stood there, holding the slack line, letting the friction of the pillar do the work. This was how you held a massive ship at the dock with a small rope. The capstan effect.
Listen to the station,
Jonah yelled.
Feel the pulse. Wait for it.
The lights flickered. The hum of the gravity generator dropped in pitch. Jonah felt his stomach lurch.
Now!
Jonah screamed. Gravity dropped to 0.5G. The 20-ton slab suddenly weighed 10 tons, immovable still, but lighter. Jonah ignored pulling the weight. He pulled the slack. He tightened the hose, changing the angle of the dangle. He took up the tension. The friction on the pillar groaned. Then, gravity slammed back to 2G. The slab suddenly weighed 40 tons. It wanted to fall, but Jonah had shortened the hose. It failed to fall straight down. The tether to the high pillar held it. Physics took over. The massive weight sought the lowest point of potential energy. Because of the tether, the lowest point shifted. It swung. The braided hose stretched, screaming under the tension. The pillar groaned, but it held. The massive slab of hull armor groaned and swung sideways, scraping along the floor with a sound like the end of time. It cleared the blast door by 3 feet. Jonah stood there, holding the tail of the line, feeling the vibration shudder through the pillar and into his bones. The path lay clear.
Go!
Jonah roared. They dived past the swinging slab, tumbling into the airlock. Jonah let go of the hose and threw himself inside, just as the hose snapped with a sound like a gunshot. Raoul hit the emergency seal. The airlock door hissed shut as the corridor behind them decompressed, sucking the fire and the debris out into the cold black of space. They lay on the floor of the secure zone, safe. The only sound was the harsh, rasping breath of 5 survivors. Raoul sat up slowly. He looked at the sealed door. He looked at Jonah, who lay on his back, staring at the ceiling, laughing quietly. How? Raoul whispered. How did he do that? Lieutenant Vess propped herself up against the wall. Her uniform lay ruined. Her leg lay crushed. But she lived. She looked at Jonah with a strange expression, something between confusion and revelation. Physics, Vess said, her voice weak but steady. He listened to the metal. The medical bay shone blindly white, but for the first time, it felt welcoming. It smelled of antiseptic and safety. Jonah sat on a bio-bed, his shoulder banged, his ribs taped. He ate a bowl of real cherry gelatin, not the mash. Vess lay in the bed next to him, her leg encased in a glowing regeneration field. Doctor says I keep the leg, Vess said, staring at the ceiling. Apparently, the angle of extraction prevented the bone from shattering completely. The tissue remains viable. I will walk again. Good news, ma'am, Jonah said, spooning Jell-O. Don't call me ma'am right now, Reese. It feels inappropriate. She turned her head to look at him. You violated 17 regulations. You destroyed Academy property. You compromised a pressure suit. You risked the lives of the entire squad on a gamble. I saved the squad, Jonah said simply. Yes, Vess conceded. You did. You broke every rule, and you saved us. She reached into the drawer of her bedside table. She pulled out a wrapped package and tossed it onto Jonah's lap. Requisition form came through, she said. Jonah opened it. A brand new rigger's belt, high-tensile polymer, reinforced buckle, rated for 5 tons. Black, sleek, and definitely not standard issue. The good stuff. Try to keep this one intact, Vess said, a hint of a smile touching her lips. And Reese. Yeah? When you return to duty, keep the boots unlaced. It seems to improve your aerodynamics. Jonah smiled. Yes, Lieutenant. 3 weeks later, the salvage bay stood repaired. The smell of hot polymer returned. The floor shone. A new class of freshman cadets stood before a heavy composite slab, terrified, shaking. Jonah stood on the observation gantry, arms crossed. He wore his new belt. Down on the floor, the instructor spoke, but not Vess. Raoul Cash. Raoul stood in front of the cadets. He looked different. His uniform was clean, but his stance appeared looser. He stood with his feet wide apart. He looked comfortable. The standard manual, Raoul said, his voice projecting clearly, acts as a guide. It is the map, not the territory. He walked up to the slab. He kicked it. Thunk. The map is perfect, Raoul continued. The territory is messy. Try to look pretty, and you die. Try to be perfect, and you break. Raoul reached into his belt and pulled out a cheater bar, a long, ugly steel pipe. Forget the geometry, Raoul said, dropping into a deep, ugly, asymmetrical crouch. He looked primitive. He looked effective. Look at the metal. Listen to its desires. Be effective. He jammed the bar under the slab and leaned back, using his weight, just as Jonah taught him. The slab rose effortlessly. Class dismissed, Raoul said. On the gantry, Jonah's datapad chimed. Notification. Jonah looked down at Raoul, who showed a young cadet how to use a boot heel as a fulcrum. Jonah smiled, a small, proud expression that crinkled the corners of his eyes. Not bad, kid, Jonah whispered. But use more hip next time.